welcome to this wonderfully national and international group as we break open really quite an unusual passage, even in terms of writing style, from Luke 16. We have Jerry from what I hope is now slightly autumnal Wisconsin, or fall. Trish from over the hill in Mosgiel. Esther from around the corner in Northeast Valley. Lovely to have the three of you with me. And Jerry, a little bit of background on this very unusual passage.
So this parable of the rich man and Lazarus is one of those that only Luke seemed to have access to. Nobody else uses it, but you can certainly see why Luke would choose it, because it's right up his alley with his emphasis on care for the poor and matching emphasis on punishment for the rich. So we have that. It actually sometimes feels like two parables. We have the first part, which is the emphasis on the good things coming to the poor and the bad things coming to the rich. And then the second part, which shifts focus a little bit on who will believe the message. And so scholars have tried to say, is this two parables that have been jammed together, or was Jesus just doing a twofer with this one, as he did with the prodigal son? One of the puzzling things about this passage, that was difficult to me reading it as a child especially, is it's a very odd picture of heaven, where apparently you can step up to the edge and look down and get a glimpse of the souls in torment, which didn't sound heavenly to me at all. It was helpful to read that this was actually a familiar folklore scenario. There are several stories similar to this, especially in Egypt, some even regarding messages sent from a wealthy trader in hell to a poor trader in heaven. So we should probably not take this as Jesus' description of the afterlife so much as Jesus' ability to adapt a familiar story pattern and use it for his own purposes.
That's a very valuable interpretive tool, I think, because it's unsettling, and that is a big challenge in reading this passage. But Esther, let's go to you now and find your sense of challenge reading this encounter.
Yeah, well, I have a real love-hate relationship with this story, both of them. Jesus, just amazing, awesome teaching on social justice, and I'll come back to that a bit later. But before I can tend to get to that, I have this challenge that's been alluded to already, that one of the very few places where Jesus does seem to talk directly as though he's endorsing this idea of hell, not just judgment or Gehenna, the municipal rubbish incinerator outside Jerusalem, but something a little bit more concrete of an image. And quite contrary to what Jesus is saying here about the poor, that imagery has been so weaponized over the years. And a lot of the people I work with pastorally are very traumatized by how much that imagery of a God who wants to torment people for all eternity has been used against gay people, of course, divorced people, women, Indigenous people, colonized people, all these groups. And so my first challenge to preachers is, if you don't believe in a literal hell, feel free to say so in your sermon, because for me, what Jesus is doing, and thank you, Jerry, you've sort of already said it, is he was a very sharp spiritual and social commentator, almost a political satirist at times. And I think he was saying to the people who were weaponizing this imagery against those who weren't pious enough, or maybe prostitutes or lepers or outcasts or whatever it was, Sabbath breakers, I think he was saying, if you believe this, man, it's gonna be those who show disdain for the poor who God is angry with. So that's where I go with that.
Very unsettling for the weaponization processes. Trish, similar challenges for you?
No, although the imagery the imagery was a hurdle to kind of jump over, and I really like that word weaponized, Esther. The primary challenge for me, though, setting that imagery aside, was the question that sprang to mind was, who is the Lazarus at my gate? So I made quite a individual response, and I'm thinking that this is an important story for Jesus, who wants us to sit up and take notice. And because the contrasts in the story are so pointed, so we know, we have a man with no name, who is the rich man, who would normally be given the honor and accolades and all the rest of it, but we name the poor, Lazarus. And I'm thinking, I don't know if there's a connection between Lazarus as in the earlier echoes of the story and this Lazarus, but it's also, there's a neat little tie-in further down about, well, look, Lord, if somebody comes back from the dead, then we'll believe. But it's a personal, individual challenge to think about, who is the Lazarus at my gate? Who am I not seeing?
Thanks, Trish. And let's back with you, Jerry, for any kind of personal challenge like the others when you read it.
Similar to what Trish was saying, it's putting myself in this parable. I'm not Lazarus, and it's very bleak. There's not much give in this. There's no suggestion that, well, you can't help everybody. It's, well, he was there, you didn't help. And that's a challenge.
Certainly, and as you say, very, very bleak. And leaving that bleakness aside is very difficult. So I'm going back to you, Trish, to tell me where you might find some good news.
Well, I think the good news is that the scriptures tell us everything that we need to know. The invitation is to ask ourselves, how are we using our money and our wealth, and how do we do that? And I'm thinking that in the good news for me is that the scriptures and Moses and the prophets, it's all there. Jesus was very clear about how we are. There are clear guidelines, clear teachings on how we are to treat the poor, the lost, and the needy. So it's there. The question is not how, but do we listen to the teachings, and how do we put them into action?
Very good. Thank you. Jerry, clarity around Luke's social values, but still very uncomforting.
Well, one of the things I love most about this, I don't know if this qualifies as good news or not, is the picture of heaven. The only description that is given is he's in the bosom of Abraham, which resonates with the Old Testament repeated phrase, he slept with his fathers, but a sense of a reward in being embraced by those who were before us, the sense of being a part of something greater. And the fact that is offered, well, of course, again, I have to say, I don't see myself as the Lazarus there, but the gift that is implied there is worth striving for.
Okay, I hear that very clearly. There's a light at the end of this rather dark tunnel, but Esther, I don't think you're going to let us get away too easily with a lack of social justice here. Maybe that's where you want to go. Tell me some good news.
Yeah, well, I think the good news is good news for the poor, among other things. I think the good news is that we have a God who unapologetically takes the perspective, takes the point of view of the needy, of the outcast, of the oppressed. And if we were to position God in the first half of this story, I think God isn't sitting in the mansion. God is sitting at the gates with Lazarus in the gutter, hungry, with the dog licking the sores. That's where God is. Maybe that's why God knows the name of Lazarus, and we don't even know the name of what's going on in the mansion. And the warning, really, that chasm that we have in heaven, the chasm between Abraham and the rich man, it's like that's about this life for me. We can build a chasm of disdain and contempt between ourselves and the needy if we are wealthy or elite or have some privilege to begin with, which I guess most of us do, and who are watching this on a device. But if actually, like, number one, there shouldn't be mansions on the one hand and people begging in the streets on the other. It's not just throw some bread, there shouldn't be that divide. And number two, I think the best way, even in this life, never mind the next, if we want to get close to God and to Jesus, is to move our position more and more to where we are actually outside the gate of the mansion with the people who are in the most need.
Right, so I'm hearing very definitely that sociological bias to the poor. I'm hearing that very clearly, and also that you're not leaving us any kind of pie in the sky interpretations. So there's no kind of cozy complacency. So back to Jerry.
I just wanted to say, I want to change my answer. I want to say what Esther said.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
that was a very cool answer, Esther. I agree.
I suspect we all might want to do that. Anyway, back to you, Jerry, because the so what?
Well, the so what is exactly what Esther was saying, that we have a world around us which is, and always has been, sharply divided between the haves defending their possessions and the have-nots with little opportunity to change. So the so what is to remember that God is always the one who hears the cry of the oppressed. That was how he ended up with Israel to start with. So God is going to be the one who hears the cry of the oppressed. That is our call as well. You're
agreeing with that, Trish? I can hear that. So
I agree with you, Jerry. And for me, the so what is building on what you said, Esther. There's an imperative here that now, the present day, matters. What we do now, how we manage our wealth, it matters, and it matters in the here and now. We've got a clear injunction. We've got a clear invitation to step outside the systems of oppression and to step outside whatever the structures are, to look at them differently and not be aligned or blinded by them, which is really what the rich man in the mansion couldn't see because he was blinded by his own self-sufficiency. And I don't think that's easy, because you have to notice it for a start and then be aware of its impacts. And so the choice is what we do now matters in our everyday. And one of those choices is to listen to the scripture and to discern and find ways of moving outside the system to sit with those who are in the gutter.
Esther, leave us with your interpretation of an implication or so what for this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it is an invitation for all of us to do our own very concrete, specific thinking about what the issues of need and oppression and poverty or whatever are in our communities, in our world. You were starting to talk about that, Trish, and I really agree. And look, obviously, if you see a beggar this week, you might want to actually stop and talk to them and give them something. But I think it's more than that. I think it's these structural issues, these issues that get quite political and economic. And, what is it? Is it housing insecurity in our communities? Is it income inadequacy? Is it structural racism that is baking in poverty in our systems? Is it climate change, actually? If you think about, so maybe a response for me is urgent action on climate change, as I see a third of Pakistan underwater, and the rich will be able to rebuild their houses, but the poor, what are they going to do? So, thinking about what actual stuff we need to do, because just to help Jesus out here, if in case he missed this point, God does love all of us, so how are we going to respond out of that love?
And I hear very clearly there that the cry from the heart, the cri de coeur of the liberation theologians for 2 or 3 generations now. So with that addition of a very deep love, God's love for all, but boy, we've got some action to take. Esther, thank you very much for keeping us honest. Trish, Jerry as well, really taking us into the uncomfortable heart of this Jesus challenge, and the fact that the church for some reason gave Dives a name even though he didn't have one, even though Luke didn't want him to have one. We were so comfortable.
I did read somewhere that that's just a mistake. The Latin word for rich man sounds like that, and that's that's how we ended up with it.
It was a really silly idea. I love this act that Jesus sits with Lazarus in the gate. Thank you all so very much for breaking open.